Hi, I'm Rachel Mikva, a professor at Chicago Theological Seminary. Welcome to the program Religious Freedom Requires Choice, where I'll share some perspectives, religious perspectives, on reproductive justice. Welcome to part 2 of the program, which I like to call The History of Christian Teaching on Abortion May Surprise You. Debate about abortion today is marked by polarization and moral certainty. People often invoke religion to support their position. Catholic and white evangelical Protestants are the most vociferous opponents of reproductive rights. But the history of Christian teachings about abortion is more complex than they acknowledge. It's nuanced, it's multivocal, and it changes over time. So in this segment, I'm going to share parts of that history, including some that may surprise you. The legal history may also surprise you. Did you know that abortion was legal in most states until after the Civil War? We'll come back to that in a minute. The first thing to know about early Christian teaching regarding abortion is that there wasn't consensus. Even the work of a single author varied. Take Tertullian, a leading Christian voice in the 3rd century. His training as a rhetorician prompted him to choose the best argument in each case without much concern for consistency. So in one place, he was challenging Platonist claims, including the claim that the soul enters the body at its first breath, when it's born. And he, Tertullian, argued instead that body and soul are conceived simultaneously. But then 10 chapters later, he used the concept of gradual formation. And he said that the fetus becomes a human reflection of the divine image after 7 months of gestation. He even acknowledged in another place that sometimes abortion is necessary, as during a difficult birth that might kill the woman and the fetus. There were church fathers who identified abortion as murder, including Basil the Great and John Chrysostom, but it wasn't punished as such. St. Jerome from the 5th century, he said that seeds are gradually formed in wombs, and abortion isn't murder unless the fetus has developed a human form with limbs. That would be around 10 to 12 weeks. St. Augustine taught something similar, but he also cautioned we can't pretend to know the mystery of the soul's emergence. This question of installment, it continued to perplex Christian thinkers for centuries, but most identified it as weeks or months into the pregnancy, not at conception. Here's a real surprise. There were 4 Irish saints in the 5th and 6th centuries who performed miraculous abortions for women. Often nuns, women who were raped or who succumbed to temptation. Ciaran of Sair, for example, who was the firstborn of the saints of Ireland, met a beautiful and virtuous woman named Brunech who devoted her life to God and became a consecrated virgin in his monastery. But the local king desired her and took her from there, and by the time Ciaran was able to rescue her, she was pregnant. So he pressed down on her womb with the sign of the cross to abort the fetus. We also have manuals from the Middle Ages that prescribe the penance for various sins. And there are some surprises here as well. In the Penitential of Finian, the penance for an abortion takes 3.5 years, while the penance for a man who had illicit sex with a woman is double that. Obviously, these manuals didn't endorse abortion, but it wasn't murder. They understood that women would do what they had to. These manuals also show that a poor woman who couldn't afford to feed another child was judged more sympathetically than a promiscuous woman trying to cover up her actions. Rape or fear of death for a woman with a narrow birth canal similarly lessened the required penance. Notice here how pastoral concerns nuance the ecclesiastical rules on abortion. As popes gained power, the rules increasingly came from them. In 1211, Pope Innocent III proclaimed that an abortion after quickening, remember that's about 16 to 20 weeks, that would be punishable by excommunication. Centuries later, Pope Sixtus V issued a bull declaring that abortion is murder at any point during the pregnancy, to be punished by excommunication and prosecuted by civil authorities who should seek the death penalty. He said the same thing, actually, about contraception. But his rule stood only for 3 years. The next pope immediately rescinded it and returned to the standard of quickening, the standard that remained until 1869. So modern Vatican statements assert an unchanging, unanimous, theological conviction that an embryo is a human being from the moment of conception. But this disregards the real, complex, dynamic history of Catholic teaching. By the way, the Protestant Reformation didn't add much to these debates. Calvin didn't write much about it. Martin Luther didn't discuss abortion at all. It just wasn't a major issue. It also wasn't illegal in most countries influenced by Christianity. Britain had easy access to abortion until 1803. In the US, abortion before quickening was legal in most states before the Civil War. Pressure to change the law came largely from the American Medical Association. Between 1860 and 1880, their campaign influenced 40 states to criminalize abortion. By 1900, it was national policy. But in 1973, the Supreme Court decision in Roe v. Wade changed it back, legalizing abortion again. In many of these historical shifts, religious convictions about abortion were secondary. It's likely that Pope Sixtus was trying to centralize his power and also reduce sexual promiscuity among priests so they couldn't have affairs and just hide the evidence. The AMA wanted to wrest control of birth from women and midwives in their drive to professionalize medicine. Shifting the other way, Roe v. Wade was decided as many Western states were re-legalizing abortion amidst a broad campaign to expand women's rights and civil rights. Religious convictions still mattered. But here's another surprise. The Supreme Court decision in Roe v. Wade had bipartisan support when it was issued, and evangelical journals and leaders were largely supportive as well. Some believed it would advance the primacy of procreation within marriage and the stability of families. I want to tell you, though, about one evangelical Christian leader who did not agree with Roe when it was issued. His name is Reverend Robert Schenck, and for over 20 years he was a militant leader in the pro-life movement. But not too long ago, he changed course. He felt the movement had lost sight of the welfare of pregnant women. It had lost sight of the greatest commandments of loving God and loving neighbor. It had lost sight of all that is required to be pro-life, including life beyond the womb. He acknowledged that he got caught up in the culture wars, in the rightness of his cause, and in the glorification of his own reputation, helping to birth a movement that resorts to violence and has abandoned so many of its other commitments. He still wants to protect fetal life, but not at the expense of women. He even began to explore what Judaism has to say about the beginnings of life, because after all, it was the faith of Jesus. I share this story because it reminds us we can't assume every person of a certain group thinks the same way. In fact, 24% of white evangelical Protestants support access to safe and legal abortions in most or all circumstances. I also share this story because it inspires hope. It again models the courageous faith of people who are seeking a balance between what they believe and a commitment to our common life.